Hello and welcome to Deep Impact, a proud member of the Duff Network where we dive deep into Wildbow's most reflective work 5 years on. Coming up next is Elliot Diebold.
And that was Ruben Morehouse.
Thanks, Elliot. And yes, we are back for Deep Impact and also the fan art contest. It's going on right now, so do some fan art, probably of Green Eyes, realistically. Submit it and you could win an awesome prize.
Yes, by the numbers, probably Green Eyes.
Probably Green Eyes. Anyway, shall we crack on with the episode? We're talking about Malfeasance 11.4 here, which picks up right from where the last chapter left off, where our good pal Alister Behame, the new candidate for leader of the Behame family, drew his deck of cards and just started shuffling them aggressively at us.
I mean, I love Alister already.
He's great, isn't he? He's so smug, he's delightful.
Yeah, because like Laird was, this like adult smug asshole or whatever, and we had Duncan, who we've turned into a bit of a joke as like, confidence that he absolutely doesn't deserve, whereas Alistair's like a younger Laird in a way, like he's the uppity, up-and-coming smug asshole. I think it's interestingly undermined. Like one of the first bits in this chapter is Alister sort of talks about how, he's not afraid that Blake will try and kill him because he knows that even though Blake has killed before, Blake doesn't want to kill people.
Yeah.
And, sort of completely misses the fact that the person he's talking about that Blake killed is, like, his uncle or his, cousin
and he
uncle.
Must know that, right? He must know that it's Laird because everyone seems to know that now. Like, Ben and Gloria found that out. Like, I don't know.
He might know it by the end of the chapter or something, but I don't know. For me, this sort of sowed the seeds of doubt in how powerful, Alister really is at knowing all this stuff.
That's
fair. I like that it's included in the start because it gives you that sense of hope that Blake can push through.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. This is a really fun chapter, right? Like, and the funnest thing about it to me is Alistair's power means that you can't really engage him on a level of, like, brawn because he does this whole thing where he just sets up self-fulfilling prophecies so that you feel like any move that you make is playing into his trap. And so you have to kind of outthink him, which makes any fight with Alistair, presumably, quite a fun little logic puzzle. And I love those kinds of chapters.
Yeah, it's a real, like, battle of wits is what this whole chapter feels like. They're throwing words at each other, not other things. Well, there's a sword.
Except for a sword, yeah. And a bird at one point.
Yeah, man. Sword, word, it's only one letter.
Nice.
But
that's what we call wordplay here in Pact. You've impressed the spirits.
But I mean, that's the thing, right? This fight isn't really about fighting, it's about impressing the audience. So it's just like a bunch of grandstanding and trying to outwit the other person. I don't know, it kind of feels like what I imagine a lot of other practitioner duels sort of could feel like. It's nice to see Blake have a go at one.
And he does okay. I mean, he wins this one, right? I mean, technically it's a draw, but
he should have won. And I just really like, this is something we sort of got to say. Alistair's explaining things as it's going, and I just love that we know he's telling the truth. Like, he's sort of looking for, little holes in the logic or whatever, loopholes, but he speaks so definitively so much, and it's just nice in the book that you don't have to be like, oh, but what if he's lying? Like, you just get to take him at face value when he says something definitive, and it means everything can just move forward.
Yeah, it's great. And Alistair as a character only really works because practitioners can't lie. It means that when he calls some bullshit, it's not just him being cocky, it's him saying, this is the truth. This is the objective truth. Or at least I'm confident that I can convince the spirits that this is the truth. Yeah, it is fun. So they're kind of locked in this weird pre-battle phase where they're kind of circling each other, trying to just gather enough information to be able to kind of know what they can do to take down the opponent.
Yeah, exactly. The battle, especially at this point, just consists of prodding and prying the other person for information. Like, you're just looking for tells and trying to... It's basically a race to find the crucial piece of information that will let you win the encounter.
Yeah, it's really fun. And the big play that Alistair makes here is he kind of calls upon Rose as the threat to Blake here. Like, the reason that Blake can't just kill Alistair is because it won't work if he wants to maintain a long-term relationship with the people that he's trying to save. And it's a great blow to score.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about trying to find the crucial bit of information you can use to defeat your opponent. Rose is a pretty good first hit. And I mean, I actually think this is where Alistair pretty much wins it, because it's the exact logic Blake considers here that basically decides, him calling the draw later on.
Yeah.
So maybe it's not what wins it for Alistair, but it's what stops him from losing, at very least.
Yeah, and I wonder, like, okay, I'm going to jump ahead on this. Because the thing that this made me think on my second read is how similar fighting Alistair must feel to fighting Tattletale from Worm. We're going to get into a bit of Worm spoilers, not too much though, where obviously, like, her whole deal is she knows enough information that even in combat situations, you can't really feel sure attacking her because she will just kind of know your weaknesses enough to shut you down. And I love that vibe from the other side here against Alistair. Like, it's so interesting having this situation where Blake basically is forced into thinking himself out of attacking because he just can't predict the consequences to it. It's so interesting.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I sort of got the Tattletale vibes from this as well. And I think it's the way they cold read you. Like, both of them have this like style of knowing more than a normal person does, but also doubling down and like bluffing that they know even more than they do. So they're kind of, both of them are using the extra information they have to double down and find out even more information and prod you.
When they're right like 90% of the time, it's so easy to think that they're right 100% of the time, right?
Yeah.
It's great. And it's such a fun conceit for a battle.
Yeah, it really is. And so speaking on that, one thing I want to touch on quickly now is how Alistair's implement is presumably this deck of cards. I mean, I don't think there's much doubt about that at this point, although it hasn't actually been confirmed. And I mean, I think it's an interesting choice for implement, because like I know they're not tarot cards, but we just sort of had like this whole poker match thing like 2 chapters ago, so it's hard not to draw the connection to like games and gambling. And I mean, the premise, the very thing this chapter opens up with is sort of Evan calling out how Alistair called it a bit of a game.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can see why the Elder Behames would be like fair in being nervous about somebody who's picked an implement that has associations with like gambling and risk-taking behavior.
Yeah. Yeah, and like his implement is so applicable to his personality as well, right? Because he is such a gambler. Like, again, I'm jumping ahead a bit, but a note that we get from later on is how fragile his whole shtick really is, even more so than practitioners who are really based on appearances, or even Behames whose powers are completely based on kind of perception. Alistair's is like that dialed up to the max, and it feels like a house of cards, no pun intended, where it's really sturdy until you find that one chink in it, and then it all just completely collapses, which is what happens to Alistair later, right? And it's so interesting, and it's so fitting for the deck of cards. I love it.
Well, yeah, I mean, he has no like offensive capabilities at all. Like, as far as we see, like he kind of completely relies on being able to win without dealing a blow.
Yeah, he pulls out this mechanical whatever spider thing later, the Tick, which is a great name, but it definitely feels like he only has like 2 or 3 tricks up his sleeve, either because he never really needs them, or he just doesn't think he needs them because he's so certain of his ability to win without getting into the muck.
Yeah, pretty much. And so it leaves him quite vulnerable if that facade cracks at all.
Really. Yeah, or if you have an opponent who's very used to getting into the muck, as Blake clearly is.
Yeah. But well, actually, so tying it all together. I mean, obviously we've just talked about all this. I mean, I compared this whole thing, or the use of the cards as the implement, to the poker game a few chapters ago. You could kind of view this entire duel as a sort of pokerish game. Like, it's all, they both spend basically the whole time bluffing, trying to decide, or figure out the other one's tells. Like it's all information gathering. Alistair's literally drawing cards. Like this is basically a high stakes version of Chapter 1.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it totally is. It's a nice kind of thematic resonance throughout this arc. I wonder, obviously the arc's not over yet. I wonder if we'll see more of it towards the end.
Yeah, maybe.
So the fight finally starts, I guess, when Evan basically rushes Alistair and gets him kind of around his eye, scratches him superficially, mostly around his eye, and Alistair can't handle this. Basically, Alistair immediately turns back time in order to recover this small blow that Evan has landed.
Yeah, and this is where you really start to feel like Blake and Evan are going to be able to do something here.
Yeah.
Because it's like a way excessive sort of way to recover it. So you're immediately like, okay, what's going on here?
I like
and of course, like,
Blake's... Sorry, you go.
I was just going to say, like, Evan keeps talking about getting like Phoenix powers and stuff. But at the moment, it seems like, based on how he behaves, he's going to be developing like Bahame eye gouging powers. Like that's his shtick as an other, is gouging Bahame eyes.
Yeah, I mean it suits Blake's shtick of just hating all Bahames. The thing I like about this is Blake's reaction to seeing this is basically like, okay, so Alistair is using his power excessively. That's almost certainly not going to help me here, but if I fuck up here or something goes wrong, I can make it so that he has an awkward conversation later, which is such a like vindictive Blake self-sacrificing thing. Like, okay, I may die in this fight, but he'll have to have a really hard conversation afterwards. Like, it's such a weird vindictive thing for Blake to be thinking.
I mean, there's another moment a bit before that we skipped over where he sort of talks about how he can't afford to prove Rose right. Like, he's fine with a lot of other bad things happening, but just like, God forbid he proves Rose right that he can't be trusted, because he just doesn't want her to be right about something.
Yeah.
So it's the same sort of like, just he wants those petty victories as much as the real ones.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Which is, I don't know, maybe good, maybe bad. Is it a human thing to be so petty, or is it an other thing? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I have a feeling it's both. I don't know if that's something either side claims.
Yeah. So Blake kind of finally lands a good blow on Alistair, kind of emotionally here, when he asks Alistair to inquire about his sword, about the hyena, and Alistair draws the 5 of coins, and it's pretty clear from the get-go that this card unnerves him.
And I love how, as soon as Blake realizes that this has unnerved Alistair, he just goes like full-on mirror monster boogeyman. Like he's walking through him, teleporting around, just being fucking terrifying. Like, it was terrifying, and I'm reading it from his perspective.
Mm.
And I was just like, yeah, he just sort of immediately, as soon as he had the advantage, sort of stepped into exactly what the Drains wants from him, and he's kind of rewarded for it.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. We'll get into this in a second, but he really seems to be slipping more and more into mirror monster boogeyman territory. But let's talk about the 5 of coins first, because I think it's really interesting. Because Blake doesn't ever really get quite why it's unnerving to Alistair or why it's tied to the hyena. And I want to talk about that for a bit. So the 5 of coins, for Alistair's deck, it's a beggar woman, but it's kind of similar for different tarot decks, obviously, where it's usually beggars, people who have suffered some kind of financial hardship, and often outside kind of opulent or nice looking buildings. A lot of the ones I looked at were like, had stained glass windows, and then in front of that, in the snow, were, 1 or 2 poor looking beggar folk. And so the symbolicness there is obviously Alistair associates it with loss, but kind of financial hardship and lack of resources, especially kind of in a fall from grace context, is what seems to be implied there. Which I think, considering that we're talking about Alistair being the shepherd of the Bahame's power, and how much they are basically just like an old money family. I can see why that would be so scary.
Yeah. No, I mean, that'll sort of make sense to me, but you're right. I like how Blake sort of pieces together this basic concept of loss and adversity, but doesn't fully understand it. And I mean, I think that's kind of the really interesting thing about Alistair's abilities here, is that layer of interpretation. Like, it is a fairly, I don't know exactly how many cards on the deck, but it's probably like, 30 to 50.
Yeah, I think isn't it 52? Isn't it the same as a normal, like, playing deck?
Oh, is it the same
I
as
don't actually know.
cards?
I don't
okay.
know. Whatever.
Anyway, like, either way, there's like, the cards can only tell you so much about a question you ask. There's a layer of interpretation you're going to have to put on it. And
it's 78, by the way.
78. That's a fair amount, but there's a lot more meaning than that in just about anything.
Yeah.
So like, I really like that. Like, you could have a whole book from the perspective of somebody with this ability, and it would be fascinating to watch them go into encounters and get like little hints of information and have to interpret what the card is telling them.
So there is that book. It's called Northern Lights.
Well, yeah, actually,
or the Golden Compass. And this is what that reminds me of, right? Is this kind of
like an illumini?
No, it's like a alethiometer, I think it's called.
Alethiometer, that's it, yeah.
But yeah, it's very much the same thing where it's like, you have an abstract symbol, and it could mean 30 different things, 50 different things, and the real skill is trying to interpret what this spirit or whatever is telling you. I agree that that's such an interesting concept.
Yeah, like, as I said, like, I think you could very easily create a whole story around just this single ability. It's really cool.
Yeah, definitely. So we already talked about the tattletale thing, but this is what really started telling it to me is is all this weird information exchange. And continuing the connection, Alister pulls out his best friend, which is a very skitter move, a giant fucking spider to protect him.
I like this because at first I was like, like a spider? That's weird. I don't understand the connection to like time. And then it keeps getting called a tick, and I remember ticks are arachnids, and I was like, oh, like, fucking these people, like the Bahames. Like,
it's such a terrible joke for the Bahames to make.
Like, as far as I'm aware, and I have thought about this, I cannot think of any substantial connection between ticks and the concept of time, apart from that stupid fucking name pun. And I think that's so on point for them. Like, I've headcanoned that the thing's name is also Tok, so it's Tok the
tick. I like
tick.
that. That's good.
But yeah, I mean, this is just it really paints that more Duncan-esque picture of the Bahames that we sort of have, where they just sort of, they think they're so fucking clever having spirits pose as ticks because it sounds like the sound a clock makes.
But it doesn't quite... I mean, I get it, obviously, but tick isn't spelt with a K, and so it just kind of drives me a little bit crazy. They've got this, like, a homophone, pun that just doesn't... It's just not quite right. Anyway, it's terrible.
This analysis brought to you from the people who do deep impact.
So let's talk about this line. I'm going to pull it out. Blake thinks, noting that he'd gained an advantage, I somehow felt fractionally better than I had. Stronger. Had I scared Alister just a bit, or had the hyena scared him just a bit? Enough that he'd wanted to summon something. And so the read that Blake makes on this is, okay, I've backed Alister into a corner enough that he has had to pull out a trick, and that kind of empowers me. But later on we see Blake is kind of feeding off of negative emotions, right? Which is, I mean, that's an escalation into boogeyman territory, right? He's actively feeding off of scaring people, theoretically.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of exactly what he's doing. And I mean, my understanding from his chat with Faisal last arc was that to a certain extent he's going to have to do that, or the drains will like pull him back in.
Yeah.
May not have even been just the chat with Faisal. I think so. Like, I agree. I think this is something he has to do, and I'm not thrilled about that. But in saying that, like, if there was a time and a place, this is it. So, like,
right, of course. But the slippery slope starts with Bahames always in this book, right? First person killed, Bahame, and I'm sure there's going to be more, right? And even in this chapter, towards the end, Blake jumps back into Hillsglade House, and the first thing that happens is he scares Tiffany, and he doesn't feel rejuvenated from it. All we see is that she's spooked and she yells something and she drops her book.
It's played more for comedy.
Yeah, but he is scaring Tiffany, and it's hard for me to not read that as Blake got some emotional, vampiring from that thing, right? Like, I can kind of see it starting to go down that slope very easily.
Yeah, sure. But I guess I was under the impression there's not really another choice.
I guess. I don't know. That's right. And there's probably a ethical way to be an emotional vampire, right? But we'll see.
Yeah.
So, at this point, Rose and her allies, who have kind of been set up as the ticking clock, or not Rose, but her minions, I guess, are
That's
close.
the word she uses.
Yes,
later
that's
chapter.
the official word, minions. They've been set up as the clock that will end this fight, ironically. Blake is on the clock for this fight, of course, and so Evan kind of goes off to stall the help, as Blake kind of starts gaining more and more ground by pulling out the 5 of coins consistently.
Yeah, and I do sort of really like this sense of Blake is trying to push away his allies so he can win it by himself. It does really raise the stakes.
Yeah, you're right. That's a very Blake move, although I feel like he has a pretty good reason for it in this.
Yeah, of course.
Can I call out my favourite line so far since the one where he yelled and prayed to the dying god in the abyss?
Yeah, go for it.
Blake says, "You have all these advantages, Alister, but you've got one thing that's always going to hold you back," I called out. "What's that?" "You're a fucking behame." Like, it feels so good for him to yell this at Alister. It's a classic.
Yeah, it's a pretty solid line, especially coming from Blake. It's perfect.
Yeah. And of course, Blake also pulls another trick on Alister here, where he basically tells Alister, and it's a weird thing to say. He says, "Hey, do you think I remember what happened on my 18th birthday?" And Alister kind of falls right for this obvious bait, because he can't not look at his cards, and that's his weakness, right? He's compulsively, it's like playing a game with a fucking strategy guide, and then you get to a point and you try not to check the guide, but you just can't because you've gotten so far based on it. You just can't do it without it.
Yeah, if you're too used to a safety net, it's hard to let it go.
Yeah.
I mean, Blake does also kind of push him into it by he there's something Blake says, I can't remember the exact phrasing, but he basically sort of says, are you too afraid that I know more about the cards than you or something? Yeah. So he does kind of push Alister into a corner a bit where Alister has to do it, but it's a good play, and Alister suffers for it.
Yeah, and this the double-edged nature of Alister's cards is really on full force. Blake picks it up pretty quickly, which is quite clever by him. And he basically starts abusing the cards to just make sure Alister can't use them anymore.
Yeah.
So Blake continues to kind of taunt Alister with the hyena, and Alister is at this point too scared to read the cards again because he knows that it'll be the third rule of threes against the behames, which obviously
there's a lot of the word three in this thing. Basically, there's all the threes are on Blake's side if Alister surrenders or draws another card.
Yeah. But I'm more of a 2048 man myself. Anyway, Blake continues to haunt Alister.
Boo.
No, it was great. It was a great reference. So Blake is kind of waggling the hyena at him. And Alister, I mean, the thing about this is Blake can't really attack Alister from inside the mirrors that well. So eventually Blake just throws the hyena at him in what is a pretty good move. Just throws it out of the mirror and it almost gets him. But unfortunately, Alister is aware enough to dodge. And so, interestingly, I mean, I guess it doesn't matter, but I do kind of wonder whether Blake's miss was intentional, because Alister sees this miss, and that's what to him is like, okay, Blake has run out of tricks. Like, I've won. But of course, the best way to beat a smug bastard is to make them think that they've won.
Yeah, I'm unsure. Well, don't the rules say that they can't permanently injure someone, and so there's this whole thing of whether or not the sword will meet that criteria? Yeah, I don't know. I think Blake's plan was literally just to try and keep scaring him, because it empowers Blake and hopefully will cause Alister to surrender.
Yeah. But Alister is too stubborn a bastard to surrender, unfortunately. So Blake is about to do some mirror shenanigans, but before we get to that, I want to talk about this line where Blake, and we've kind of touched on this before with Blake's sympathetic magic, but this line makes it very obvious where he thinks, "I willfully relinquished my presence on this mirror realm." And that's like the key word to say, okay, he's pulling his sympathetic magic reflection tricks. But yeah. I think it's important to know that, like, especially considering what happened in Arc 8 and Arc 9, where Mags and Blake were so desperately fighting for their place in the world, this trick that Blake has learned requires him to relinquish his presence in the world, even just for a moment, right? And that can't be a good sign, can it? And the thing I really like about this as well is I kind of was thinking about this, and Blake has always assumed that Rose never learned this power because she didn't experiment. But I mean, Blake is obviously quite self-sacrificial. He's very much the kind of guy that would give up his goal of existing, of continuing to exist in order to kind of get an edge. Whereas Rose's whole thing is or at least she was, fighting to exist. And so Rose would never relinquish her presence on the world, even for a moment, because that's toxic to her. Whereas Blake would do that sacrifice just to get an edge in a fight.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but as soon as you wrote that here, I was like, oh, I love that explanation. I think that's probably spot on. It makes a lot of sense. I do agree though that there's some really powerful symbolism behind Blake letting go of his presence to use this new power, especially because then the next step is to literally lessen himself by yanking spirits out of his sternum.
It's like the most self-sacrificial power that could ever exist.
Yeah. And I mean, it sort of ties back, I think, a bit to what Kranos was saying last chapter, about how he felt like Blake shouldn't exist. And it's almost like, this ties into that a little because Blake gets rewarded a bit for existing less, basically.
Yeah, exactly, right? So Blake pulls his sympathetic magic trick again. He gets a reflection of the hyena, smushes a bird into it, which, that can't be good for the bird. I mean, getting smushed into cards, okay, I'm sure you'll be fine, Spirit, but getting squished into the hyena, I don't know. I don't like that. I don't like that one bit.
I wouldn't be impressed if I was the Spirit.
Yeah.
I assume it's not a nice place to be. I don't know if it'd be bad for it, but it'd be that'd be like getting thrown in manure or something, presumably.
You know what else this makes me think is, we know that dead things can be fed power and then come back, because that's basically what happened to Molly, right? The hyena's dead, and Blake's just smushed some power into it. I don't know, I wouldn't want to see him continue to do this. I don't know what would happen. Anyway, so Blake gets a sympathetic hyena reflection, kicks the reflection, and that causes the real hyena sword to spin right towards Alister, and it's basically going to injure him, if not kill him. It's definitely a winning blow. Until Sandra comes in and just flicks it, and off it goes, spiraling off to the side. Dang, no more dead Behames today, unfortunately.
Yeah, you can't win them all.
Yep. And so as Sandra shows up, it's kind of revealed that Rose's minions weren't going to be the problem, but, as they arrived, the attention that they draw would summon Sandra, Johannes, whoever, and that's what would end it. So it's not necessarily that Rose would be anti-Blake or anti-killing the Behames, but that it would cause attention that would cause this fight to get broken up.
Yeah, it's a nice sort of little reveal. I don't know, I sort of had a different read of the situation as it was unfolding, and I assumed it was Blake didn't want Rose's cavalry to show up because they would make him stop and organize some sort of truce and take his win away. And that is, sort of what happens.
That is exactly what happens, yeah.
But, I do like this sort of reveal that Sandra and Johannes are also kind of walking around playing peacekeepers.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because I don't quite understand why Sandra, Johannes, and, Alister as a representative of the Behames, they're so, on the same page here. I mean, those three are fighting each other for lordship, right? That's an active thing that's happening. But they seem to hate the Thorburns so much that a win against Alister is worse if it's from Blake than if it's from them, and they would actively stop it so they can take him out themselves, or... I don't know. It's interesting.
So I think Sandra sort of explains it. My understanding is that she sort of says they have to prove themselves as lords as well. It's not enough to just go to town killing everyone and causing natural disasters and all that, and making a mess. The spirits will hate you. You might win the battle, but then the spirits won't really respect you. And this goes right back to what Laird was saying in Arc 1 about how as chief of police he had really good standing with the spirits. I think that's sort of what Sandra's talking about here is her and Johannes in particular, because I still, they're the main contenders, Alister and the other Baham, so whatever.
Yeah.
Sandra and Johannes are like, they're playing the Peacekeeper because they need to win it the right way as well, and that's with decisive moves that don't cause collateral. That's sort of my understanding. So that's what she's doing here, is preventing skirmishes that don't involve her and Johannes from getting out of control.
Yes, but if I were a Sandra or a Johannes, the way I would approach this situation, and granted I probably would die, is let Blake kill Alistair, then step in as the Peacekeeper and, in air quotes, or, present it this way to the spirits, you punish Blake or you punish Rose, and that takes them off the table as well, and then suddenly, okay, you've still acted as the Peacekeeper, but you're down 2 contenders. Like, maybe there's a reason that wouldn't quite work, but it feels like I don't see why they need to get themselves dirty here in order to, instead of just kind of acting the holier-than-thou and clean-up crew kind of role.
I guess, like, the spirits might be clever enough to know that, if you're even if they don't know that you're doing it on purpose, it's like, if you're not able to get there in time and prevent these sorts of things, you're probably not going to be a great lord. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's fair.
But if you're, like, the whole point as a lord is to enhance the stability of the region, and if you're not capable of doing that now, you're probably not going to be capable of doing it when this place is so much bigger.
Yeah, that's fair read. Yeah, I guess I wouldn't be a good lord. Never mind. I'll take that off my 5-year plan. So with Sandra and Johannes isn't here, but his presence is definitely here.
He sent what I'm 99% sure is a djinn.
Yeah. So with those two around, Alistair basically says to Blake, let's call it a truce. And Blake kind of has to go along with this, because if he doesn't, he's basically worried that Alistair will have predicted that and something worse will happen to him. So he ends up saying, all right, call it a truce, and heads back to Hillsglade House, where Rose invites him in as an he Woo!
Yeah, I mean, so jumping back like a little bit, I found his logic, where he agrees to the draw, super fascinating, because it starts off with this big paragraph where Blake's sort of thinking, this isn't what I want, this draw, it does nothing, it doesn't help, blah, blah, blah. And then he immediately finishes that thought with verbalizing, yep, okay, it's a draw. And there's like this really sort of cognitive dissonance between what he was just thinking and what he's saying. And I mean, I felt like there were a few moments that were sort of like that last chapter as well. And I mean, I don't know quite what to make of it. I don't know if this is... I don't know exactly what I'm meant to read into it yet. I guess I'll be keeping an eye on it, but it seems like there's something going on. I mean, something we haven't talked about yet this chapter, but that bell has been tolling all chapter, and it always comes in at these... Wobber's so good at choosing the times to mention the bell again, just after, like, Blake will think something potentially ominous, and then it's just... the bell was still tolling, and it's like, oh, fuck.
It's interesting. I think, so obviously we're seeing this through Blake's perspective. I think the bell is kind of to him acting as a bit of like a, check yourself, check what you just thought, right? Like, because he has a few moments where he thinks to himself, oh, if I was more myself, I would have just rushed in, and the bell probably isn't helping. And it seems to me like the bell is kind of causing this instinctive reaction in him where he stops and thinks, okay, am I acting on instinct here, or is this what I actually want to do? And I think that's what's happening at the end here. He thinks about it, and then the bell rings, and he kind of, I don't know, he just kind of goes with the option that he feels is safer, rather than pulling a Blake and just going whatever the fuck he wants to do.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's interesting, because the impression I got in 10.x was that, the bell was meant to be having the opposite effect.
Yes.
It's meant to be riling everyone up, so... Yeah, I don't know. I still feel like there's... I feel like the bell's going somewhere. The way it was so constantly sort of name-dropped in the last 2 chapters is something that's stirring shit up. I feel like there's going to be a big bell moment, and I don't know what it's going to look like, but I know I'm going to love it.
Yeah,
and then,
we'll see.
And then, I'm not quite sure what to do about the way Blake is sort of zigzagging around thinking about what he should do in service to Rose. It feels like there's maybe something there, and I don't quite know how to put it together yet, so I'm just going to keep an eye on it.
Fair enough. So yeah, Blake didn't kill a Baham, unfortunately, but he did get Rose on side, which is kind of a win. I mean, I don't know, maybe it was a baseline expectation of what should have happened 2 arcs ago, but it's progress.
Yeah, it's progress because she's such an ass. But I mean, even then, it's basically explicitly stated they're not good.
No, they're not
it's
good.
just
No.
they're just not as bad as they were. And
Yeah.
Rose kind of invites him in, but it's this real like, I'll invite you in. I'm not going to answer any of your questions or anything. Like it still doesn't feel like they're friends. But
Yeah.
At least she invites him in, right? Like
At least they're
that
technically
is progress.
allies now.
Yeah, she's willing to put up with him now, which is nice.
Yeah. Yay. I want to call out one other line here, by the way, which is where Sandra says, if you want to wreak havoc, do it after dark. Alistair, I believe you're late. I am, Alistair said. And Blake thinks, wasn't he 18? Kind of implying that there's a curfew that he suspects Alistair should be old enough for it to not apply to, but, he's for some reason still applying it. So just a fun thought is that Blake's thinking, wasn't he 18? It makes me think that the Behemoths do play with magic, and Alistair is clearly the kind of guy who would fuck around and make gambles with, like, time magic power. I kind of am curious whether Alistair is actually much younger and just accidentally aged himself, which I think would be a really funny thing for it to have happened. It would be very in character. So we'll see.
That would be a funny twist. That would be expensive as hell, though, I imagine.
Maybe, yeah, I don't know.
That's an expensive mistake.
Yes.
I feel like the bookkeepers would have been aware of it. I don't know. I thought it was more because I thought he had to go to school. Like, I thought it was still the middle of the day and he was late to class.
Oh, yeah.
And
maybe my time's all fucked up. I think
Blake is just confused that 18-year-olds go to school, but, like, that's
not that abnormal, is it?
No, that's year 12, right? Maybe Canada's different. I don't know. Maybe they finished school really early there.
My theory still stands. Maybe Alistair's actually in like 7th or 8th grade and just played with time magic. And that's the note that we're going to leave this episode on. That's 11.4. It's quite a fun chapter. I always love these practitioner fights. Like they always go in such interesting, like logical puzzle directions. And this is no different. It's a great one.
Yeah. And so before we go today, we're going to do another little comment deep dive and see what people were thinking 5 years ago when they read this chapter 2.
Do you want to bring out your comment first, Elliot?
Yeah, sure. So, as per usual, I've sort of brought one that's more of a comment thread.
Classic Elliot move.
Started by Woolly-Headed Lamb, which is a crazy name. I love it.
Aren't all lambs woolly-headed? Maybe not. I don't know. Don't know that much about farming lamb.
Me either. But they're talking about the tarot cards as an implement. We've already sort of touched on this a little bit. Basically talking about whether or not they're a good choice. And there are a bunch of interesting little points brought up sort of in this chain, but I really wanted to focus on Great Wormgold, who sort of talked more about the tarot cards themselves rather than just, like obviously we talked about them before, but as indicated by our lack of knowledge and how many cards there are, we know more about playing cards than tarot cards. And so Great Wormgold points out that the tarot cards sort of have this passivity to them, in that it's somebody who is just sort of looking at the future and not making it.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because it kind of contradicts a bit with Alistair's whole shtick.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, they also pointed out that it implies like a sense of randomness, which I thought was interesting.
Is it randomness or is it fate? Right? Like, is it the most unrandom? I don't know. I guess it's kind of both.
Yeah. I mean, the image of drawing cards sort
Definitely
of lines up with randomness, and like I think that fits into the whole, unpredictable gambler type angle. But yeah, they're just sort of a lot of interesting sort of ideas talking about like what. It's funny with like rarer implements like this. There's sort of disagreement about the socio-cultural and declarative nature of these various implements. That sort of leads to fun discussions.
Yeah, definitely. And I actually wish that we had more time to dive into all the different implements that we see because I think it's such a fun way to analyze a character.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Anyway, the comment I pulled out was a comment by Nega Darkwing, and they were talking more about this comparison to Tattletale that we kind of touched on. And I want to read out the bottom third of their comment here because I think it's really interesting. They say, Finally, there's been some comparing him to Tattletale. I can see this, but he doesn't seem to have learned a lesson Lisa learned most painfully, the limits of his ability. Lisa learned the hard way the drawbacks of her power and the painful way of what can happen with it when she's reckless with it. I think that's a really interesting comparison because Alister is, he is someone who is such a risk taker, but he doesn't, as far as we know, have an origin story that is defined by taking a risk and having it backfire in the worst possible way. I'm really interested. I mean, maybe he does, but not that we've seen. And I'm really interested to see whether that exists or whether that is something that might happen over the course of this story, perhaps.
Yes, I get the impression his current confidence probably comes from an easy life, and I think that would fit. That makes more sense to me in terms of the Bahamians and everything we know about them so far. So, yes, I think he's currently in the pride before the fall section of the loop that, Tattletale sort of, is doing somersaults through.
Yep. Yeah. So I guess we'll see. We will continue to see the fall of Alister. Fun. That'll be fun for everybody. But unfortunately, that's the end of our show for today. Thanks for joining us. If you want to do some declarative, analytical, or sociocultural... declarative, authoritative, or sociocultural analysis of Alister's tarot cards, the best place to do that is in the discussion threads. They'll be linked in the episode description down below.
Yeah, but if you want to broaden your podcasting horizons beyond Pact, don't broaden them too far. Just go to doofmedia.com and that's
not
broad
that far.
Enough.
No. Yeah, only broaden them to include other Doof Media shows.
Yeah, exactly. And doofmedia.com is the website where you'll find the details on all the other Doof podcasts. At the same time as this episode's releasing, there's another Doofcast episode, which is on the last Airbender movie. So I will be immediately jumping from this to listening to that because I cannot wait.
I'm so excited. We actually both individually rewatched the last Airbender movie in preparation for this damn podcast, and it's so terrible, guys. I can't wait to see how Scott tries to justify it. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah,
fun.
Yes, I'm very excited. It's a terrible movie, and hopefully don't watch it if you haven't, unless you're wanting to watch a bad movie.
I found it so fun to watch. I did a little live read of it where I was posting my thoughts in the Doof Media Discord, which we'll come back to in a second. It was really fun. Actually, so if you want to check out that live read that I did, you need access to the Discord. And the only way to get access to the Discord is to go to patreon.com/doofmedia and support this great show and all the other great shows on the Doof Media Network. Donate some amount of money per month. It's up to you how much. And you'll get access to a bunch of cool perks, including the Discord, including the Doof and Chill streams, depending on the level you pledge at, of course. Head on over to patreon.com/doofmedia and you can see all the great perks that are available there.
Yeah. And have you heard of Pact? If you haven't, welcome. You should probably go
good episode to jump in on, 11.4.
Either way, you should head on over to patreon.com/Wildbow and give Wildbow some money for not just Pact, but all the other stories he's wrote and is still writing and will hopefully write in the future.
Yep. Definitely do it. It's a great way to not feel as guilty when you open up a new chapter and you're like, man, I should really give some money for this thing that I read, 2 or 3 times a week. It's great. I feel so complete now. There's nothing eating away at my soul every day. Anyway, on that note,
we'll be back on Monday, the 16th of September for Malfeasance 11.5.
We'll see you then. Ciao.